existence of our party. They are alone, and I really believe that nothing would make them more happy than to have the care of two sisters of Edward Beverley. Be sure of that. But I will be more sure of it if you will find means of sending to them a letter which I shall write to them. I tell you that you will do them a favour, and that if you do not accept the offer, you will sacrifice your sister's welfare to your own pride, which I do not think you would do." "Most certainly I will not do that," replied Edward, "and I am fully sensible of your kind offer. But I can say no more until I hear what your good aunts may reply to your letter. You mistake me much, Chaloner, if you think that any sense of obligation would prevent me from seeing my sisters removed from a position so unworthy of them, but which circumstances have driven them to. That we are paupers is undeniable, but I shall never forget that my sisters are the daughters of Colonel Beverley." "I am delighted with your reply, Edward, and I fear not that of my good aunts. It will be a great happiness to me when I am wandering abroad to know that your sisters are under their roof, and are being educated as they ought to be." "What's the matter, Pablo?" said Humphrey to the former, who came running, out of breath. "Soldiers," said Pablo, "plenty of them. Gallop this way, gallop every way." "Now, Chaloner, we must get ourselves out of this scrape, and I trust that afterward all will be well," said Edward. "Bring the horses out to the door, and Chaloner, you and Grenville must wait within. Bring my horse out also, as it will appear as if I have just ridden over. I must in to change my dress. Humphrey, keep a look-out, and let us know when they have come." Chaloner and Edward went in, and Edward put on his dress of secretary. Shortly afterward a party of Roundhead cavalry were seen galloping toward the cottage. They soon arrived there, and pulled up their horses. An officer who headed them addressed Humphrey in a haughty tone, and asked him who he was. "I am one of the verderers of the forest, sir," replied Humphrey respectfully. "And whose cottage is that? And who have you there?" "The cottage is mine, sir. 2 of the horses at the door belong to 2 troopers who have come in quest of those who fled from Worcester. The other horse belongs to the secretary of the intendant of the forest, Master Heatherstone, who has come over with directions from the intendant as to the capture of the rebels." At this moment Edward came out and saluted the officer. "This is the secretary, sir, Master Armitage," said Humphrey, falling back. Edward again saluted the officer, and said, "Master Heatherstone, the intendant, has sent me over here to make arrangements for the capture of the rebels. This man is ordered to lodge 2 troopers as long as they are considered necessary to remain, and I have directions to tell any officer whom I may meet that Master Heatherstone and his verderers will take good care that none of the rebels are harboured in this direction, arid that it will be better that the troops scour the southern edge of the forest, as it is certain that the fugitives will try all that they can to embark for France." "What regiment do the troopers belong to that you have here?" "I believe to Lambert's troop, sir, but they shall come out and answer for themselves." "Tell those men to come out," said Edward to Humphrey. "Yes, sir, but they are hard to wake, for they have ridden from Worcester, but I will rouse them." "Nay, I cannot wait," replied the officer. "I know none of Lambert's troops, and they have no information to give." "Could you not take them with you, sir, and leave 2 of your men instead of them? For they are troublesome people to a poor man, and devour everything," said Humphrey, submissively. "No, no," replied the officer, laughing. "We all know Lambert's people. A friend or enemy is much the same to them. I have no power over them, and you must make the best of it. Forward, men!" continued the officer, saluting Edward as he passed on, and in a minute or 2 they were far away. "That's well over," observed Edward. "Chaloner and Grenville are too young-looking and too good-looking for Lambert's villains, and a sight of them might have occasioned suspicion. We must, however, expect more visits. Keep a good look-out, Pablo." Edward and Humphrey then went in and joined the party inside the cottage, who were in a state of no little suspense during the colloquy outside. "Why, Alice, dearest, you look quite pale," said Edward, as he came in. "I feared for our guests, Edward. I'm sure that if they had come into the cottage, Master Chaloner and Master Grenville would never have been believed to be troopers." "We thank you for the compliment, Mistress Alice," said Chaloner, "but I think, if necessary, I could ruffle and swear with the best, or rather the worst of them. We pass for troopers very well on the road here." "Yes, but you did not meet any other troopers." "That's very true, and shows your penetration. I must acknowledge that, with troopers, there would have been more difficulty. But still, among so many thousands, there must be many varieties, and it would be an awkward thing for an officer of one troop to arrest upon suspicion the men belonging to another. I think when we are visited again I shall sham intoxication. That will not be very suspicious." "No, not on either side," replied Edward. "Come, Alice, we will eat what dinner you may have ready for us." For 3 or 4 days the parliamentary forces continued to scour the forest, and another visit or two was paid to the cottage, but without suspicion being created, in consequence of the presence of Edward and his explanations. The parties were invariably sent in another direction. Edward wrote to the intendant, informing him of what had occurred, and requesting permission to remain a few days longer at the cottage. And Pablo, who took the letter, returned with one from the intendant, acquainting him that the king had not yet been taken, and requesting the utmost vigilance on his part to ensure his capture, with directions to search various places, in company with the troopers who had been stationed at the cottage, or, if he did not like to leave the cottage, to show the letter to any officer commanding parties in search, that they might act upon the suggestions contained in it. This letter Edward had an opportunity of showing to 1 or 2 officers commanding parties who approached the cottage, and to whom Edward went out to communicate with, thereby preventing their stopping there. At last, in about a fortnight, there was not a party in the forest, all of them having gone down to the seaside, to look out for the fugitives, several of whom were taken. Humphrey took the cart to Lymington to procure clothes for Chaloner and Grenville, and it was decided that they should assume those of verderers of the forest, which would enable them to carry a gun. As soon as Humphrey had obtained what was requisite, Chaloner and Grenville were conducted to Clara's cottage, and took possession, of course never showing themselves outside the wood which surrounded it. Humphrey lent them Holdfast as a watch, and they took leave of Alice and Edith with much regret. Humphrey and Edward accompanied them to their new abode. It was arranged that the horses should remain under the care of Humphrey, as they had no stable at Clara's cottage. On parting, Chaloner gave Edward the letter for his aunts, and then Edward once more bent his steps toward the intendant's house, and found himself in the company of Patience and Clara. Edward narrated to the intendant all that had occurred, and the intendant approved of what he had done, strongly advising that Chaloner and Grenville should not attempt to go to the continent till all pursuit was over. "Here's a letter I have received from the government, Edward, highly commending my vigilance and activity in pursuit of the fugitives. It appears that the officers you fell in with have written up to state what admirable dispositions we have made. It is a pity, is it not, Edward, that we are compelled to be thus deceitful in this world? Nothing but the times, and the wish to do good, could warrant it. We meet the wicked, and fight them with our own weapons, but although it is treating them as they deserve, our conscience must tell us that it is not right. Surely, sir, to save the lives of people who have committed no other fault except loyalty to their king, will warrant our so doing, at least I hope so. According to the Scriptures, I fear it will not, but it is a difficult question for us to decide. Let us be guided by our own consciences. If they do not reproach us, we cannot be far from right." Edward then produced the letter he had received from Chaloner, requesting that the intendant would have the kindness to forward it. "I see," replied the intendant. "I can forward these through Langton. I presume it is to obtain credit for money. It shall go on Thursday." The conference was then broken up, and Edward went to see Oswald. End of Chapter 24. Recording by Kalinda in Raymond, New Hampshire, on September 25th, 2007.